First, I just want to say, Lisa, thank you for joining us in this series of conversations. I'm, again, always honored and thrilled and inspired. Emma and I were just talking before you came back about how every one of these conversations is just so stunning to see. Again, positive, brilliant, caring, confident women that are doing this work in all these different shapes. And I get to learn from something from each one of them. And thanks for sharing your work, because I think it inspires others. So we were talking about our shared advertising background and how we got through this piece of it and want to do something that was more, I don't know if meaningful is even the right word, but focus on the things that were really important to us. Because I think the hard part for me when I was in advertising is I would be given these assignments that I either resonated with or didn't resonate with. And I wanted to know more.
Exactly.
Maybe it's my control freak in me, but I want to be like, no, I really want to work on this and less on that, or shift it to some place that they weren't necessarily always ready to be shifted to. Again, Emma and I, my colleague, were just saying that part of the moment right now that I'm feeling is, on the one hand, we're frustrated that women aren't as visible in a lot of the work that we want it to be in, but there is a receptivity, I think, to these conversations around the future, around innovation, around how we restructure organizations, around the role of diversity, that I think that I haven't experienced in my career quite as tangibly as I feel it now. But you're sitting on more boards around this, and you are, sort of at a different level of the conversation. Do you feel like it's opening more?
Like, here's the good news. I had quit a board a while ago because I felt like they were focused on diversity and inclusion, but not equity. And there was a big resistance to including that in there. Hey, we're futurists, right? We're before our time, but they thought it was irrelevant. And I really disagreed with that, because the point was, in my opinion, with diversity, it's not about a quota. That's what diversity is. It's not about inclusion, sitting at the table, if I'm muted when I get there. And equity is really, not just asking my opinion, but really giving a crap about what I say. And to me, if I'm not, I want to be bold and different and irreverent. I'm a futurist, right? And not in a scary way, but I don't know why my voice isn't as important. So my feeling is has it changed? Yes, because people are more aware that equity is a big part of it. What has not changed, though, is people really moving the needle on it. So we have the awareness, and we now have things and boards dedicated to it. But now I think if people aren't going to make that just window dressing, they really have to move the needle more aggressively. And they're not.
So I guess the question is, because again, we started this talking a little about the statistics and how bad these are. We start looking toward the future of the people who are generating the solutions and we're creating the value, or benefit from the value of that. So that part I totally agree with. I guess I feel like hopefully the awareness piece is, and then the structural piece, because I've always gotten frustrated around the fact that we're trying to put women into the structure that already exists, that was designed in a much more male lens, right? For people who didn't have the kind of responsibilities or just thought about it differently. And so one of my
biggest... You're designed to fail. You're designed to fail, and what that does is that puts the level of failure on the individual versus the system.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a really, really big difference when we look at those two things, and we really need to call out the system piece of it. So I'm 100% of that. Okay, so the work that you are working on now, so you wrote the second book. So tell me about the arc of the first book, and then what made you decide that there was another book in you that needed to be, like, where's the problem that you're trying to solve for right now?
First of all, I never wanted to write a book, ever. In my life, I thought it was for people with egos, and I thought, oh, a book. I don't need a book. I run a business. I like to make money. I like to do these things, and I thought books were for people that just want to be up on stage, which is exactly what I do now. So I'm the biggest hypocrite probably that you will interview. But the idea of a book is a platform, right? It tells you what your vision is and what your purpose is. And so the minute I did that, it really got me to focus. So. And I wanted to be about innovation, creativity, and futuring. I wanted to teach people about, it's not about ideas, it's challenging the future. Like, we can create it. And the problem is that people, of course, wanted to do that, but they didn't have the time. So if you ask them what they spend their day doing, it's meetings and emails. And most people are not hired for their meeting and email skills, as far as I know. So my thought was, I got it wrong. The front end of innovation, in my opinion, is not the featuring part. It's the simplicity part. We've got to stop the unnecessary work. We've got to get rid of things to make time for more thinking and meaningful work to happen. Until we do that, people just see innovation and all this other stuff as one more thing on their to-do list that they can't seem to get to.
Right.
So that's what drove that. And I can't tell you, I don't have a single client that comes to me and says, oh, no, we're good. We're totally simplified. No one says it, right? Because it's such a pervasive, human behavior, this complexity stuff. And I think it's only going to get worse, especially driven by technology. So teaching people to really be more intentional with their time is going to be a really key success factor in the future.
Do you see a difference between incumbent bigger organizations that have been around forever or the tech companies that are designed in this digital world already?
Yeah, in terms of simplification.
Well, in terms of how much they're bogged down by the process or by rules that don't matter anymore, or that they don't have time to innovate.
So when people are small, they don't have as much structure or process. So guess what? It's easier. That said, as you grow, you need process to be more efficient. But the problem is we go over, and it's human behavior, right? To just want to add to versus in stopping and saying, whoa, is this really the right way to do it? And so, complexity is usually created with the best of intentions. But unfortunately, we create the beast that we become a slave to. And the bigger the organization, the more kind of large corporate syndrome you have, this inertia, right? Complexity creates complacency. And what you'll see in a small organization is there's still that vision, that drive, that growth. But in a big organization, it's less about, the opposite of success isn't failure, it's inertia. And when you start to see people being complacent, not caring anymore, and no drive, that's when you know you have too much complexity.
But when you see something like, because I think what's interesting is you've got Novartis, and you've got this long list of clients that I would argue have built sort of this scalable empire on one end, and then you've got Google on the other end, or Microsoft or other. So do you think it's just a matter of that as they scale, they become more complex? Or I guess what I'm trying to figure out is those guys had the opportunity to build it differently, as they were growing, and they saw so much. Google invests so much in learning what works and what doesn't work. I find them to be fascinating in that, and yet they still get sort of pulled under the same tide, it seems.
Well, because a good news about them is that their vision, they're about challenging the status quo. So that is a core principle, so people feel empowered to do that. However, what both organizations have in common is humans. And so human behavior is, what creates complexity isn't just technical. It's not regulations. It's behavioral. It's risk, fear, power, control, and trust. Oh. And if we can change those behaviors, and as leaders recognize the reason people create more complexity by CCing 1,000 people on an email, inviting too many people to a meeting, uncovering too much in one fell swoop, it's because of fear. And so if we can take that fear off the table, we would be more simplified and focused.
There was an article I saw that you'd written for Forbes Women that talked about, are you a simplifier? And it was sort of the 6 criteria. And what I loved about it, again, the paragraphs were all very short, and you gave a tangible example with everyone about the organization that was part of it. And then there was one, I can't remember who the leader was, but the idea that they recognized that they were remaking the decisions that people who were more, junior, or people who were a little closer to the front had already made. And I felt like they could get rid of having to sort of the double checking or the double decisioning. That's a tough thing, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting when I ask people what really bogs them down. It usually goes meetings, emails, and then decision making. So it's interesting, when I was first doing the research for the book, what I thought was kind of cool was that was unexpected for me. And the issue with decision making is it's that people put it off, not that they're making bad decisions. It's that they're not making any decisions. Right. So if we could help people, one, not have the fear over making a bad decision or a decision, letting them know what decisions they're allowed to do. And how we do that is by defining the guardrails, not the handcuffs, the guardrails within which they are allowed to make decisions. So I would argue that rather than people saying as leaders, you're empowered to make a decision, don't say that. That's empty. I don't know what that means. Instead, I would say you're empowered to make these kinds of decisions, and you're not empowered to do these kinds of decisions. So what you're not empowered to do is even more important than what you are empowered to do.
Right. Well, so there was a callers on once with a senior leader at a pharmaceutical company, and we were discussing whether or not we would end up doing some work together. And I don't know what I was talking about with the future. And she's like, you know what? We talked about sort of this idea of power moving through the organization, right? Being distributed differently and more to the edge. And she said that one of the most vulnerable things, which is, she goes, but if I don't tell people what to do, what will my job be? And I thought, wow, there's a million other things that your job will be than to just direct people, right? But I think that that's mixing up leadership and managing.
That's very different. Like, I don't, if you're a project manager, that's trafficking, right? But I think leading is also growing, cultivating, making people curious, questioning how they do things. So I would
setting
not
the strategy for a lot of that work. I feel like there's so much coaching and strategic work that needs to be done on the horizon right now. So what we're seeing inside organizations, right, when I go and talk to people at the most executive level, that message resonates a great deal because they're sitting on the edge of this. They're trying to make better decisions more and see where the organization needs to go. Where we see a lot of it get bogged down is in that middle level. Whether, I don't know, it's a title thing or as much as it is.
It's true.
Pardon me?
It's true. That's very true. We say that the problem with most organizations is leadership needs to change from the middle out.
Right. Exactly. Right. And I think that's where we're really trying to focus. And so first I would get really frustrated by that. And then I would try and get to a place of more empathy and think, okay, well, that's where production really sort of, the rubber meets the road. They're the ones who need to make sure that they meet all the KPIs and the yada, yada. And so the idea of like trying to unravel a process that has gotten them kind of to where they are and giving them this responsibility to meet whatever the increasing demands are. And again, it's not like those are getting any easier, right? Mm-hmm. Those are getting more and more intense. Do you focus your work more on the senior or on the middle, on junior? Like, where do you think that there's more the most leverage to be able to change the thinking inside an organization?
So the answer is yes. Where companies spend their time and their money is at the leadership level. Right. That's unfortunate because I feel like you have to earn the ability to grow, But what we focus on is teams. Because I think if we just think of things in terms of bands and levels, I don't think that's how people work. But how they work is teams, right? It's a team sport. So we designed all our tools and our how we teach people to embrace change around teams. So work on a team problem, work within your sphere of control, work on the behaviors that your team sets, because I don't believe that organizations are one culture. I think the culture, it's mini cultures led by the leader and the teams that you work in every day. That's it. So we focus on teams because I think if I only train the leader, I don't know if anything else is going to happen.
It was interesting. I had an opportunity at one point to sort of leave the corporate world and do some other stuff. And I joined an artificial intelligence startup. And it was really interesting to understand startup, technology, artificial intelligence, and the culture and talent. And what I observed in this very, very small group, it was like 20-something people as we grew, was a really big difference between how software people work and how ops people work.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So on the software side, distributed teams, very, much more comfortable. We had people all over the country that worked on these problems. They had their own process with scrums and sprints and whatever to be able to get the work done. They peer coded, so they worked and supported each other more along the way, and they didn't feel as isolated. And at one point, and you talk about teams, you were a leader at one moment, and then you were a support person on another team for a different project in a different role. Like the roles were so much more fluid. And on the ops side, definitely none of that had happened. I called it, Brona was playing startup. And it was a really challenging thing for them to do. So do you see differences as you're going into the types of teams or the type of work? Because I think I'm trying to advocate more for this way of working, which is much more fluid and less banded in any way.
Yeah. Right? So we call it the Hollywood studio model. I mean, coming from a creative background, I think the future within teams is less about organizational hierarchy, but skills and capabilities, right? That's why we all want to be credentialed. And inside our own company's LinkedIn, it's going to be more about the activities, the outcomes, the things you did to become what you are. And so I think that that's going to be really interesting of how people start to grow their own resume inside. And maybe their worth is going to be kind of like in a consulting model, how many days you're on the bench versus engaged, because so many people want you. So you really are going to have to prove your individual worth versus putting in the time. And I think the Hollywood studio model, which, you and I are comfortable with working on creative teams, it's just bringing the band back together at different times with the right skill sets when you need it, which is all about agility and resilience in different time frames, right? So I think we can learn a lot from creative models.
For sure. I mean, the way I used to describe it on my website, I think it's still there. It says the future is fluid and so are our teams. And
very
so
good.
The idea
Love
is
it.
that we have some people that are part of the organization and part that are what we call pinkers, people you need to know, and then we pull them in depending on what the project is and how that works. But it's very much that Hollywood studio model. But it's interesting again to see what are the business frameworks that allow for that, right? When are you a independent contractor? When are you a full-time person? Like the structures that support or don't support, making that kind of workflow. How does insurance work? How does so-and-so work? Like things are still not fully structured in a way that I think makes sense. One of the big things I worry about actually is the move to independent contractors that so many big companies have done that have left people then without a whole bunch of support services and structure that I think helps them grow.
Well, that's a problem. Well, that's one of the things I think we're going to see with COVID too, which is everyone can tell me till they're blue in the face that the remote work movement, which is great, by the way, I love it. We're remote, we're hybrid actually. That it's about work-life balance and giving people that as a perk. That is true. However, the reason why most people do it is because they save so much money. I mean, what we're doing is we are offloading so much of the structure that companies used to bear to the worker, right? So now you literally bring your own office and your own computer and your own infrastructure and everything, and you're a gun for hire, but they just don't have to pay you as much. So it's a huge benefit to companies.
Right. And if you play it well on the other side, it is a huge benefit. I mean, that's why I love being where I am. Like, I left that sort of more corporate side of it 15 years ago, went again in-house for the AI company for about a year. And I was like, wow, this is really different again. This is hard. I got to go back into my world where I get to be much more fluid and much more comfortable with that. But I think that for whatever it is about my personality that made that very easy transition, I think for other people, it's a much more challenging transition. And even that idea about how I manage time. I know, again, in one of your articles, you talked about one of the big challenges right now is work-life balance and being able to know what those boundaries are. But for me, there's just a tremendous fluidity. Like, I'll go in the middle of the day and walk my dog, and I'll work until midnight at night to go do something. I'll, run around with a friend around the lake on Friday morning, but I'll work on Saturday afternoon. Like, for me, it's just, I don't see it as boxed in that way, but I also don't work in complex teams as much, right? My work is more constricted to my individual contribution or the small teams of which we've all kind of learned to be more fluid in that. So I guess the question is, you look at the future of working. I always make the distinction between the future of work and the future of working. So working is how we will work, right? And the work is what meaning that work has and how we distribute productivity differently as we move ahead. But if you think about working, what are some of the things that you think that we could be doing better in order to be able to support the kinds of tasks that we needed in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do need to, first of all, let your teams know what the expectations are around working. Because I do think that there has to be some kind of boundaries or rules or whatever. So corporate or whatever the company is can make sure that the work's getting done, but also people can understand that work for the company, again, guardrails, not handcuffs. I was surprised when so many people went to a remote model. They never articulated any communication standards, such as we're going to meet every Monday. We're only going to meet for an hour. You have to have an office set up. You must be on video or not. But just people say that they are allowed to work remotely, but then they don't articulate exactly what the boundaries are. And remember, people operate in fear. So we can put those boundaries down. Great, then let them operate within it, because then you build trust. And that's what
right. It's just a clarity piece of that whole piece. Because the way that I was looking at it, the companies that have really invested in all that effort around, again, mission or purpose or being able to really communicate what it is that we're trying to do, and around communication protocol. Right, they had regular stand-up meetings, or they had a way of being able to communicate more effectively, quickly inside their organizations. Did well as they moved into this remote movement really quickly. And the ones that didn't have either of those two things in place were really floundering. And we saw a lot of fiefdoms and much less efficiency happening. So this whole idea about does remote work, it makes me crazy, because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It really depends a lot on the organization, the kind of work you do, the culture that is inside that organization, the processes that you put inside that organization. And we're also not working from home, we're lifing from home. So it's also not a fair analysis at this moment, making that. So I'm like, but I do look on the horizon, and I guess the question is, there's one of the things I talk so much about is the shift study that was done years ago, the Shift Commission on the Future of Work. And they had, I think, 100 futurists that came together. I was not one of them, but they had 100 people that came together, really thought about it. They did some primary research. They did some, whatever research that already existed. They narrowed it down to there are 46 variables, and they finally just narrowed it down to 2. And they created this grid of more work, less work, more gig work versus more full-time work. And they actually put these really great titles on them, like King of the Hill versus Jump Rope versus Rock, Paper, Scissors versus, I forgot the fourth one. But it was really a thing. And it was actually, Anne Marie Slaughter was one of the key architects of that. And their point was, we don't know which direction it's going in, and we need to be able to prepare for all four of those. Back to scenario planning, right?
Yes.
So if you do so much more work inside these organizations now and see what it is that they need in order to be able to thrive as they move ahead, and the shape of their work changing so much across these organizations. If you had an intuition or a futurist kind of bent on it, do you have a sense of where the future of working it goes?
I think it'll be hybrid. I think in terms of, I'm more focused on skills and capabilities, so that would be my angle on the future. But I do believe that in a positive way, the shift from expertise to T-shaped teams is really important, and that's why I think we're finally shifting away from just having these hard skills being important and recognizing that what we used to call soft skills, I call them power skills, is really the differentiator. So this is, you can be competitive with the best scientists, but you can be disruptive when you have skills around agility, resilience, collaboration, curiosity, and we need to put more weight into those things. And we need to start,
No, sorry, keep going, sorry.
We need to start putting more money and, weight value behind those things as differentiators.
So the two pieces that being to, I talk a lot about incentives, right? Inside organizations, we incentivize what it is that ends up happening socially or financially. So sometimes it's, we do this, and sometimes it's, whoever gets the assignment, whoever gets, noticed in the company all hands meeting, whatever, we kind of take signals as to what it is that we're supposed to do. And a lot of what I've seen is incongruence, right? We say we want this, and then we incentivize that, and then we wonder where people are kind of stuck in the crosshairs in between those two things. So when you start to imagine those sort of power skills, which I love the way you describe them, how are those made visible or incentivized inside an organization so that people really feel they can develop? And the reason I ask that is because you go to the next piece. What I do believe is going to happen is AI, and we've been building these solutions, will be part of the way in which we define who's the right person for whatever that right assignment is, right? And you talk about being this like Hollywood model where we start to pick the right players for the whatever, and the question it will be augmented through technology that makes that more visible, what the right team should be for this. And so the question is, if I'm really good, that the hard skills are easy to quantify and to make visible in a technology like that, how do the power skills become something that I should be investing in, because that will be part of what will make me useful as an AI decides if I should be on that team or not?
Well, there's all different kind of inputs and outputs, right? So many inputs can be around training, hours around it, in terms of whether it's, again, learning the skill, practicing the skill, being part of a community around the skill. So, for example, you could actually work on, I think it's project-based and experience-based, around how you're agile, right? Are you good when you get put into a team and something changes? How did you do? Another thing is around resilience, not just how many ideas did you propose, but how many didn't move forward, but you still proposed. It can be around creative problem solving. So there's lots of different ways that we can measure these things for the experience and outcomes that we do. And I think that the key for that is, one, having leaders put that into the business performance, but also in terms of your personal performance. So a lot of the things that we measure from the past, I think, are just kind of, I don't know. Like, I remember execution used to be the big thing that I was measured on. Strategy. I mean, those are such huge buckets. But really, for my role, it's more about resilience, curiosity, and creative problem solving. So we need to embed that more into what we're evaluated.
Well, I love it. If you can figure out a way that we could measure or create some sort of like signal for resilience, right? So it's not so much that how many things that I proposed that didn't go forward, and so I get measured on the fact that only 4 out of 10 went forward, but I also get credit for the fact that I threw out 10 and I was okay with the fact that 6 didn't.
Yeah, because I think that gets to a volume situation too. It's like, it's, how creative, how many different ways did they poke at it? Another thing that's really important for the future is, well, we would call it provocative inquiry as futurists, but it's curiosity. And you can even measure that in terms of how many questions people ask, how often they challenge the status quo, how good of, are they really good at framing their agendas, their emails, even the subject lines with questions versus statements. There's a lot of different ways that you could get creative about it.
It's so interesting to see you break it down so scientifically. It reminds me, I don't remember, was it Ray Dalio, the one at Bridgewater, who had like the little scorecard? Every time somebody came out of a meeting, they would literally get ranked as to how they were in that meeting. They would be carrying around this like little, like literally they had almost like a baseball card that had sort of key, stats around who they were.
No. Well, as long as people aren't like then fearful every time they walk.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I would not have thrived in that culture. That I come from more the creative, like let's bump around in the dark a little bit. That would have been very, very hard for me. I think to be in there. But the last way, I'll just round this out by the conversation that I think that the whole self-awareness piece, right, knowing who you are and how you operate, is a really big part. I will argue that has definitely been my key to success. Is I double down on the stuff I'm really good at. And I figure out how to either stay away from or outsource the things that I should not be spending my time doing. Not because they're not important, but because it takes 5 times as much energy for me to do that it takes for me to go do this piece, right? So in terms of self-awareness and the work that you do, so first, your position on that. And then second, I guess, are there some tools or ways in which you guys have helped people individually assess that for themselves?
Assess themselves in terms of self-awareness and the type of leader that they are.
Or contributor that they are,
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is about how you need to identify the behaviors that I think you want people to have, and then you need to model them. So let me give you an example around simplicity. And we talk a lot with people of if you want people to be simplified or empowered to be simplified, what are you allowing them to do? And what is holding them back from doing it? So for example, we would do an audit and say the complexity creating behaviors are things like people speak with jargon, they delay decision making, they ask for too many pre-reads, right? So things that suck up time. Then we say, well, what do you wish the behaviors were? And it's interesting because you got to get people into behaviors, not tactics. And the behaviors are that things like, I want the ability to say no. I want the ability to be jargon free. I want the ability to be clear when I communicate. There's all types of things like that. Anyway, what that does is that allows people to agree on norms and behaviors versus every time you run a meeting. And it makes sure that the leader actually is modeling those behaviors too. So for example, we had an instance at Pfizer where people were wanting to say no to meetings. They're bogged down in meetings, too many meetings. And so the leader said, of course, why don't you just say no to meetings? Get my permission to say no to meetings. And a month later, he realized everyone was still bogged down in meetings. And someone that he really trusted on the team confided in him and said, until you start saying no to meetings, no one's going to do it. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of that. It's first of all, identifying what it is and then modeling the behavior because the leader sets the tone.
I totally agree with that. But so then when you go to so who am I and how do I operate? Because there's a reason people do that. Like I would argue I probably create way more complexity than whatever. You saw how many emails were in my inbox, Lisa, your head would spin 37 times. So. Because I keep like it's all good stuff that at some point I might need and I don't want to get rid of, or like it was useful for 30 days, it's not useful anymore, and I'll go back and clear it out, and so it's just like sitting there and bogging everything else down. But this idea of kind of eventually getting to a place of understanding again where I fit into the kind of universal matrix of making life work better. Yeah. Are you a Myers-Briggs person? Are you an Enneagram person? Are you a StrengthsFinders person? Have you created your own tools around that for people?
All of it. We love all of it. But I think those are just I do. Like we all talk about that. We have a bunch of different things that we use. There's also a tool called Foresight that we use with clients, run innovation. Like, are you a creative problem solver? Are you an ideator? Are you an operational person? And so you can figure out the best way of a team working together. Because I think the issue is teams think they all have to have the same set of behaviors. And I think that the idea is you have to have the team have the same set of behaviors, not one person possessing all of them, because it's not realistic. So it's really looking at more of a whole versus just the individual person. Like I'm an ideator. I love to come up with ideas, and the people that are always punching holes in it drive me crazy. But I need the people punching holes in it. So we all have to respect our strengths and learn how to work together to make the whole.
So I mean, we've been talking about that for many, many years. I remember there was a team thing I did. We just did colors, right? The whole thing about red, blue, green, yellow, whatever. Yep. Super simple. I got back to simple, like the world's simplest tool. But the idea was if you had to build a swing set in the backyard, how would you do it, right? And red people would like outsource it, and green people would design it themselves, and yellow people would throw a party and everybody build it together, right? Like I was like, oh my god, I just love how like clear that is in its understanding. But I feel like we've been talking about these things for a while. Do you think they're permeating organizations deeply enough, or is that still work that we need to dig into? As you see,
it's still. I think we do need to shift from thinking of things in terms of bands to teams.
Yeah.
So what's the ideal operating together?
Awesome. Well, as you start to think about what your work is focused on over the next, like, I guess this past year, has it shifted? And then where is it that you want to really create the most impact moving forward? Where is it that you want to focus your energy?
Well, I mean, to me, I'm all about accelerated learning. So now it's really accelerated. Everything we do is 1 hour or less because everyone has ADD. Every video we do is 2 minutes or less, ADD. So it's what that does is it allows people to focus and be very tactical and practical and learn a thing versus 20 things, right? So it's made us very accelerated. The other thing is that we've pivoted everything to be virtual. And what I like about that is that gives people flexibility, but also it's forced us to be very creative in terms of how we interact, because interacting in person is very different than interacting remotely. And we've had to put a lot of work into not just the technologies that we use, but also the way that we deliver and facilitate, the way that you address introverts and extroverts, the way that you address group time versus individual time. You have to put all those things, right, into making not just a good course or, learning assignment, but a good meeting. And the more we can get people to think about those things, I think the better outcomes they'll have when we do come together and collaborate.
So do you imagine what do you imagine the work, again, it's going to be so different depending on organizations, it's hard for me to answer, but at one point I was at the Deloitte and we were on their campus north of Dallas and Plano. And it's a great space. It's
I
really
love it.
Space. And I was involved in a debate team about whether the future of the office or not the future of the office. And of course, I was like the anti-office team, and the other group was the pro-office team. But I felt like that became such a great example of the fact that we would convert remotely in whatever way we wanted, that we come together to a space like that to learn together or to collaborate together or connect together, and then we come back to our world and do our thing. And so I felt like that was just a really tangible and, to me, really strong model of what this could look like moving forward. Are there others that you've seen that you just think are really good examples for other? I guess part of what I'm trying to draw from you, Lisa, is you get to go into the world and see so much of this that the rest of us don't see. So these tangible examples that you give are really helpful. Like when you write and you give very clear, stories from people. Yeah. So if you see people on the edge that you think have whether you name them by company or not, are there some models or some organizations or industries that you think are ones that we should be paying more attention to as role models?
Yes, and I think that a lot of people were starting to dabble with, those kind of WeWork shared spaces outside of their companies to incubate the more creative thinking beforehand. I mean, I know a lot of our pharma companies, like with the Pfizers and the Novartises and the Genentechs, they literally, before they had put all the cool stuff into their labs, right? But we can collaborate virtually, but we also need creative spaces beyond meeting rooms. So what they started to do was experiment with hiving it off, like getting it out of mothership into WeWork spaces. And now I think due to remote work, people have seen that there are a lot of different, we need to rethink what the office is really for. I believe that we come up with the best ideas when we're alone and we build them when we're together. So I think that when we're alone, we have that time to think, to digest, to come up with. And then when we come together, we're better prepared. We can build on each other's ideas. We can kind of take them to another level. So that means that when we get together in an office, the spaces need to be designed accordingly. And we're hearing a lot of companies now, the building managers, the people in charge of real estate, rethink the office layout. I don't believe that open office plans work. I think it's too noisy for people. But I think we could do a better job of kind of like thinking about what would the ultimate collaboration spaces be like, and put more of our real estate towards that.
I see, again, what I think what makes your work so powerful is your ability to frame this so clearly, right? So I do believe that that's exactly right. We think on our own and we build with each other. It's a really, really great way of framing that. All right. Well, any other advice about, if you had a magic one, the people who are listening to this, to have one sort of great takeaway about the thing that would empower them in their work, or that they could shift in some way, that do you think that we are just still not fully awake to? What would you want it to be?
Well, I'm big on how we spend our time. So, they say, tell me what you say yes to, and I'll tell you who you are. And I think we need to be more intentional with our time. So, say yes with intention, that it's something that really is what you want to do, and no with purpose. And I think that would really help people have happier lives.
Which is a really beautiful goal. It's the one that we all want, right? I want a safe and thriving and happy future. I think that would be a good place to be. I look forward to crossing paths more. I really hope that someday we get to be in the same space and be in the same event. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Me too.
My wish will be that somewhere in the future we get to collaborate on something, Lisa, because I really do think that your brain and mine would have a lot of fun dancing together.
Yes, I agree. I'm so glad we connected.
I'm so glad. Thank you for making the time for this. I really, really do appreciate it. Now, in the grand scheme of all the things that you do, this is a smaller event, but I do think, again, we hopefully inspire some others to realize that this work is really fun and powerful and meaningful, and that if we can shift how we do this, we will be able to create the future that we all want to see. So, yay. Well, good luck with everything on your end. Stay healthy, and we will come find you soon.
And let us know because we'll help promote your work. So will you let us know when you have, like, not just this episode, but others, and we'll put it out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, totally. And, I'm actually doing a big thing for Dell World tomorrow.
What's up?
So Dell World is their big event, their online event for all the people in the world of Dell that care about that. And so tomorrow I'm doing a small piece on partnering, how important partnerships are in this whole Partnering for the Future section. So Dell World, that's been getting a lot of love in the last few weeks. So people are very, very excited about that. But for the Femme Future stuff in particular, what happens when we put these up online, I think to the extent that you notice it and you find one that you think is relevant, that you can put your own like on it, it helps amplify the visibility of that. We don't tag everybody in all of them because there's too many of them and too many many other things that we were being tagged on. But to the extent that you find one that you want to help amplify, I think it helps. And there's so many, again, there's a woman, Zahara Shetty in South Africa, who's amazing. Her posts are beautiful. Kathy Hackle, and if you know Kathy's work, there's just, oh my gosh, there's just, from Kathy, who's all about the metaverse and all about how we're going to be living in virtual reality. And Zahara, who is a conscious leader in Pretoria, who's dealing with trauma and how we manage technology and trauma and prepare youth for the future. It's just this amazingly.
Oh my God, I'd love to speak with her.
She's great. I'm a big, big, big fan of Sahara's. And I think, again, going back to showing voices of different types of people in different places, Sahara is the kind of leader that I think of the future. And I would love to give her more visibility. So, yeah, anything that we can do to, maybe we'll give you some of our picks. Brianne Eisler, if you've never read her work, she's this 80-year-old woman who's been writing about new socioeconomic structures of partnerism forever, who I love. So, yeah, I love introducing you to this world, because I think that here's the thing that we will enrich you with, Lisa. You're so connected to and facile with the world of business and business leaders. There's this other interesting thingy on the fringe of these women who are building everything from governance systems in Europe to, again, anti-trauma curricula in Africa or South Africa, Geshe, who's doing smart cities in South Africa, to Rianne, who's building. There's just this other kind of web around your work that I think would be inspiring for you. So.
Oh, I would love it. And it would be very inspiring. I'd like to be inspired. I need more juice, so that's good.
That's what I'm just saying. I feel like you're very good at being able to take the hose and focus it here. But my wish would be that I get to wrap you in a floral cape that empowers you with some of this other stuff, because this other stuff is really, really fascinating. The women that are doing this work, and men, but I think that the women in particular, there's a sensibility about it that I just find really inspiring. So
wrap me in that cape. I love it.
Cape is not how it works. You've got your own cape. Just a scarf. I'm going to wrap you in this scarf that just kind of adds that little ping to the work that you are doing so effectively. So again, thank you for everything you do. We really, really appreciate you, and I can't wait to meet you in person.
Ditto. Thanks for everything. Good luck at Dell World.
Thank you. That'll be fun. Take care. Bye.